Hi, I'm Miss Sarah, and this is At Home Makerspace, where every week I show you how to make fun projects with things you can find at home. In this week's video, we are continuing our Learning to Sew series. Previously, I showed you how to make lacing cards and stitch cards to help practice our beginning sewing skills. In this week's video, we'll be making a simple sewing project using felt. To make this project, we'll be learning basic sewing skills like how to use a pattern, how to thread your needle and how to knot your thread, how to do a simple straight stitch, and how to sew a button. We've got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. When you begin sewing, one of the first things you'll need to do is cut your fabric into the right shape. You can do this using a pattern. You can make your pattern by printing or drawing it on cardstock. If you are drawing, be sure to use a thin marker, and you'll need scissors to cut out your pattern, or you could just use cookie cutters. If you are using a paper pattern, you'll want to cut it out so you can trace it on your felt. Just wanted to add that these patterns actually came from a tutorial on Instructables. It's part of a really great Learning to Sew tutorial, so if you're interested in either the tutorial or the patterns, be sure to check out the link in the description. Felt is my favorite fabric to use for beginning sewing projects because felt is really easy to work with. Unlike some fabrics that get these loose strings when you cut them, felt doesn't fray, making it ideal for beginning sewing projects. You'll need your patterns to trace, some felt. I recommend these felt sheets, a marker or washable fabric pencil, and scissors. We're going to need 2 pieces of felt cut from our pattern. So the easiest way to do this is to fold our fabric in half like this, so it is 2 layers. And you just want to make sure that the pattern will fit over those 2 layers like so. So now I'm going to take my marker and trace around my pattern. I recommend putting your pattern in the corner like I'm doing here. If you put it in the middle, you're going to have a lot of waste around the outsides, but if you put it here, you have all this extra big piece of fabric that you could use later on. Keeping my fabric folded in half, I'm now going to take my scissors and cut around the line I just drew, making sure I'm cutting through both layers of fabric. When I'm all done cutting, I should have 2 identical pieces. And if you notice the marker line on the outside, I'm just going to flip my pieces around so the marker is now hidden on the inside. You can follow these same steps to cut pieces from all different kinds of patterns. The other important things you'll need for your sewing project are a needle and some thread. There are lots of different kinds of needles out there, but for our project, make sure to use a needle that's good for hand sewing. Mine came in a packet like this, and you can see they say hand needles right there. For your thread, you can use either thread like this or even embroidery floss. Now I'm going to use black embroidery floss for my projects because I wanted it to really stand out against my felt when I'm sewing. But you can absolutely choose whatever color you would like for your project, and you could choose embroidery floss or thread depending on what you happen to have at home. The first step of preparing our needle and thread will be to cut our thread. I'll actually be doubling my thread up later on, so I want to cut my thread twice as long as I will need. So if I want my final thread to be about 18 inches, which is a good length, much longer and it can tangle easily, I want to double that and cut 36 inches. And something you may not know about embroidery floss is that it's actually made up of 6 thinner strands. I will only be using 2 of the 6 strands, so I'll go ahead and separate these 2 from the rest of the embroidery floss. All right, now something else that you might notice here is that my cut end is a bit frayed and it will be hard to get this through a sewing needle. Let me show you. Here's my sewing needle and I'm going to try to put the end here through the eye of the needle. That's the hole at the top. And as you can see, it's not really going through. But don't worry, I have a few tricks to share if you're having trouble threading your needle. One thing you can do is recut your thread, but don't cut it straight like this. Cut it at an angle. As you can hopefully see, when I recut it, it's no longer quite as frayed, and let's see if it'll go through the eye of our needle. Okay, well, it's a little bit better than last time. I'm just going to keep working here and see if I can get, oh, okay, I got half of it through, so I got one of my strands. Now I'm just going to focus on getting the other strand through. Almost, and we got it. Okay, so the scissor trick worked. Another thing you can try is wetting the end of your string, and as you do this, pinch or twist to bring the threads together like so. This looks like it should be pretty easy to thread. Let's see. Almost. And we got it. Wetting the end of your thread definitely makes it easier. You could also try using a needle threader like this. It has a metal loop here at the bottom, which will help you thread your needle. These handy little devices will often come in sewing kits, and all we need to do is put the metal loop through the eye of our needle. There we go. And now we're just going to put our thread through the metal loop. And I'm just going to wet it again and give it a little twist. Okay. Perfect. First try. Now it is through the loop. And if I pull it back through the eye of the needle, it will pull the thread through the eye of the needle. I hope these tricks help you when threading your own needles. Once my needle is threaded, I'm going to line up the 2 ends. And now we'll want to tie a knot in the end of our thread. I think that tying knots is probably the hardest thing for a beginning sewer to learn, but don't worry, I have a couple of different ways that you can try. Feel free to watch this knot tying section a few times if you need some help figuring out how it's done. For this first method, I'm going to wrap the thread around my pointer finger. So place it on top, hold it in place with your thumb, wrap it around. And now I'm just going to place my thumb back where the thread overlaps and slowly roll it off of my pointer finger. I should now have a twisty loop like this. Now I'm going to pinch the loop between my pointer finger and my thumb, twist it flat between my fingers, then pull down to form a knot like that. For this next method, I'm actually going to wrap the thread around the needle. So make sure the end of your thread is facing the eye of the needle. Then wrap it 2 or 3 times around the needle. It should look something like this. And remember, your end needs to be towards the eye or this next step won't work. Pinch the loops between your thumb and pointer finger and pull it back along the thread. When you reach the end, it should form a knot like this, and you can trim off that extra tail. We're finally ready to start sewing, and I'll be showing you how to do a very basic stitch called the straight stitch or the running stitch. Here's how you do it. I'm going to start demonstrating the straight stitch on one layer. Turn your felt to the back side, then bring your needle up through the fabric. The knot will keep the thread from pulling all the way through. Next, you'll bring your needle down through the fabric, and that is your first stitch. We're going to repeat this process by going up through the fabric, then down through the fabric to make our next stitch. You want to try to make sure that the size of your stitch is pretty even. Another thing to watch out for is you don't want to pull too tightly or your fabric will bunch up like this. Pull your string tight enough that you don't have a loop, but not so tight that it puckers. When you're all done, you're going to want to finish by making a knot on the other end. So I'm going to start by making a small stitch that doesn't go all the way through to the other side. And now I have this loop here. I'm going to pass my needle through the loop and pull it tight, and I now have a small knot here at the end, which I can trim like so, and everything will now be held in place. I added a little more stitching, and now I'm going to show you how to sew through 2 layers of felt. Line up your 2 pieces, then grab your needle and thread, and I'm going to actually start on the inside between the 2 pieces. This way I can hide my knot between the 2 layers. This is the exact same way I started when I was sewing with just the 1 layer. Now I'm going to make sure my 2 layers are lined up. And I should probably note here that because felt is pretty textured, it grips pretty well and you don't usually need pins to hold your 2 pieces together. So that's why I'm not using any pins here. Okay, so back to the sewing. We're going to bring the needle down, making sure to go through both layers. Now I'm going up from the back side and down from the front side. And I'm making sure I follow the edge of my pattern, and I'm going to repeat that process until I run out of thread. As you can see, I have run out of thread and will need to tie off this piece before I can start some new thread. From the back side, I'm going to go up, but I'm only going through 1 layer. Now make a small stitch on this inside layer, pull it through, and I'm actually going to back my needle through that loop because I don't have a lot of extra thread. I now have a small knot and I can trim the extra like so. And now I am ready for my new thread. Like before, I'm going to start my new thread by going from the inside up through just that top layer. And now I'm making sure that both of the knots are hidden between the layers. And I can just continue on as before, going down between the 2 layers, then up from the back side and repeat. When you get to the end of your project, you'll want to tie off the same way I showed you earlier. So from the back side, I'm going through just 1 layer, and then I'm going to take my needle and make a tiny stitch on the inside between those 2 layers. Pull until you have a small loop, then bring the needle through that loop and pull it tight. Go ahead and trim off any extra. And the last thing I want to do is to push that knot in between the fabric to hide it. And there we have our finished product. For a variation on this project, you can also use the straight stitch to sew smaller pieces of felt on top of a larger base piece of felt, like I did with this butterfly. Now, let's talk about how to add a button. To add your button, you'll need a needle with some thread. Again, it can be thread or embroidery floss, scissors, your felt, and some buttons. Buttons may come in a few different styles. This one has 2 holes, and this one has 4 holes, and this one is a little different. It actually has this little loop here on the back, which is called a shank. I'm going to be sewing on a button with 2 holes, and it's really simple. Place the button where you would like it on your fabric. Then from the back side, push up through the fabric, and it should go through one of the holes in your button. Pull all the way through until the knot catches. Then we're going to go down through the other hole, like so. And my button's twisting a little bit, so I'm just lining it up so that my line goes horizontal. I'm just going to repeat this a few times, going up through one side and down through the other until my button feels secure. Once it's secure, feels good, I'm going to go ahead and tie a knot in the back the same way we've done before by making a small stitch, pulling until we have a loop, then passing the needle through the loop and pulling it tight. The last step will be trimming off the extra thread with our scissors. And with that, our project is complete. And remember, if you're using a button like this with 4 holes, be sure to have your thread go through all 4 of those holes to hold it securely to your fabric. And if you're using a button with a shank like this, be sure that after you go up through your fabric, you bring your needle through the shank before going back down through the fabric. We hope you enjoyed learning some basic sewing skills by making a simple project out of felt. Once you finished your project, you could use it as a small coaster, or you could add a pin to the back like this and wear it. If you do make something out of felt, we'd love to see it, so please take a picture and share it with us at the library. You can do so through our Facebook at www.facebook.com/FHCPL, through our Instagram, our handle is @FHCPL, or you can send us an email. Our email address is makerspace@finleylibrary.org. We'll be back again next month with a new sewing project. Hope to see you then. Bye!